at the pace that AI is moving from a generative AI perspective, how are we as a bank positioning ourselves with platforms, with technology to utilize that in those four pillars? And then we're starting to run experiments in all of them.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Jude Schramm. Jude is the Chief Information Officer of Fifth Third Bancorp, a national banking institution based in Cincinnati that earns in excess of $13 billion in annual revenue. Jude's been in role for roughly 7 years, and in his role, he's transformed the company to position it for scale and resilience. He's introduced modern engineering capabilities while also building the skills for the future on his team. I look forward to hearing more about all the above and more through this conversation. Jude joined Fifth Third in early 2018, following nearly 17 years at GE, ending his tenure there as the CIO of GE Aviation. Jude Schramm, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to be here.
Well, Jude, maybe we begin with Fifth Third. If you could provide a bit of an overview more than I did there as to the business that you're in. I'd love to hear it in your own words.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Fifth Third is a national bank. We are primarily, as you mentioned, headquartered in Cincinnati. Our retail branch really runs the I-75 corridor of the country from Michigan to Florida. We have about 1,300 branches across that entire footprint. Our commercial bank, which is about 62 to 63% of the revenue of the business, is national, literally spanning from California to New York. And we've been on a rapid growth phase for probably 2 decades now as a bank. And, it is, as you can probably imagine, IT is becoming a bigger and bigger part of it. So as CIO, one of my jobs is to keep millions of customers banking with us every day and to keep the 20,000 employees that we have serving those customers.
That's interesting. Well, let's dive a little bit more into that role as CIO. Talk a bit about your purview. What do you have within your span of control?
Yeah, good question. As CIO of the bank, I really have responsibility for all of our major technology functions within Fifth Third. So your core CTO, infrastructure, network, storage, data centers, cloud. I have our CISO organizations, our information security, all of our line of business CIO functions. So the bank has 3 primary lines of business. We have commercial banking, we have consumer retail banking, and we have wealth and asset management. I have IT, engineering, and line of business facing IT leaders across all of those. We have an enterprise data office, which is looking at our data strategy across the company. And then more recently, we have artificial intelligence as a part of the organization. And then separate from that, bringing it forward kind of from the days of GE, we have a Lean Six Sigma practice that I lead, as well as we have a transformation office that is really non-IT, partnered with IT, looking at all of the modernization we're doing, not just of the platforms that we support as an IT function for the bank, but the business processes and the way that we're transforming the ways of working at the company.
Let's talk a bit about that modernization aspect of it. I know that that's been kind of a foundational element from which a lot of the other things you've already briefly mentioned that will go into greater depth can develop with you can develop with greater confidence as a result of that. Across your, as I mentioned, nearly 7 years, or roughly 7 years with the organization, can you talk a bit about some of the forms that modernization has taken?
Yeah, when I got here, we really set a path that was meant to be a 5-year journey. I like to say it's a 5-year journey that added 2 years, one for COVID and one for bank acquisition that we did like literally day 3 that I got here. But we really look at the modernization like a stepped process. Step 1 for us was always infrastructure. We had to have the right foundation for the company, whether it's data centers, network, storage platforms, hardware, all of that. The first 18 months, 2 years I was here, was really about upgrading and investing in that strategy, moving to a modern data center, getting our cloud footprint established with our partners at Amazon, building out our on-prem private cloud capabilities as well. And so, running a network that could support all of the bank's needs, whether it be remote work. Think about the pandemic. We had to go from 6,000 remote connections a day to 20,000 in about a 2-week period. So you had a lot of those things in just core infrastructure that we had to get established and right, building up the resiliency of the bank. Really took a couple years to do that. And then after that, we really launched kind of 2 pillars, modernizing our platforms and modernizing the way that we establish our customer experiences. And so over the next 3 or 4 years, we've really been working on those different priorities for us in terms of the bank traditionally was a mainframe heavy, custom built monolithic set of core platforms that ran lending, retail book of business type stuff. our trust platforms for wealth. And over the last handful of years, we've really migrated to a strategy of buy, partner, build, where we're taking things that are fairly standard banking capabilities and putting them with key partners. So our general ledger, our human capital systems, our commercial lending platform, our mortgage platforms, those are all now moving off-prem and sitting with key partners because those are places where we don't really differentiate. And then where we do, in the experiences that we're creating for our customers, we build out a heavy focus on engineering internally so we can, through keep modern APIs, build custom experiences for our customers that we own, but they sit on top of very standard platforms that are capable of any bank to run in the industry. And so that's been our philosophy that we've run. AI is bringing a whole new thought to the experience when you think about how that's going to come in and really bring new ways to think about enhancing the customer experience or driving more efficiency into the big kind of internally facing things that we do. But that's been a pretty standard roadmap for us that we've been driving for now the better part of 7 years. We're at that point now where we're kind of beyond the inflection point. We've finished a lot of the core infrastructure. We finished a lot of the heavy lifting of the processes, and now we're really converting the legacy onto the new platforms as they're fairly well established. And the next couple of years are about just moving from old to new and getting them pivoted over in that direction.
Well, I want to double down on that point you were raising with regard to customer experience, especially in light of the fact that you interestingly noted and appropriately noted that those are areas that are points of differentiation and ones where, homegrown solutions may be best. Talk a bit about the evolution of customer experience. You talk about the period in which you've been CIO across those 7 years, a major acquisition, certainly COVID, which changed the way in which many of us interacted with the various businesses and services that we provide. Our own personal value chains really and supply chains changed dramatically through the couple of years that most of us were remote, even in our personal lives. Sure. I'm curious how you think about customer experience enabled digitally by your team and its evolution to this point.
Yeah, there's really two key aspects for us when it comes to it. And I think you made a great point. Coming through COVID, I think everybody realized that having a digital experience for your customers is so critical because, for the existence of banking, especially in the consumer retail space, branches are an extremely important aspect of that experience. And even through COVID, what you realize is that people still generally pick their bank based on branch proximity, believe it or not. But the difference is they're not going in there for the things that they used to. They're not going in there to cash checks. They're not going in there to deposit their paycheck. They're not going in there to do some of those things. Now, the branch experience is very much more of your lifestyle. It's like about getting loans. It's about doing different services that banks maybe traditionally didn't used to offer that they do now. And so for me, one element of the customer experience digitally is making sure that those folks that are Fifth Third employees working with customers in our branch settings or wherever have a tremendous employee experience that can translate to the customer experience digitally. And so we try to spend a lot of time focusing on designing how that employee, whether it's moving from behind a desk to now sitting in front of you with a tablet, or being able to do things with you where the customer can be on a Fifth Third digital experience while the branch employees as well. We're trying to make that an experience that's still worthwhile when a customer has to go and get a combined digital and human experience. And then separate from that, we're spending a lot of time thinking about how we deliver a fully digital experience to our customers through our mobile applications, through whatever. And so we start probably like most traditional companies do. We've worked with third parties. We've developed customer journeys. We really are understanding what are the things that a customer wants to do with us. And really, the very simplest way to think about it, Peter, is like we want our customers to have access to their money to do what they want, when they want, where they want. And so using that as the foundation, whether it's, again, sending money through digital channels like Zelle or Venmo or PayPal, or it's depositing a check through the online mobile app, or it's being able to use it to apply for a loan or to get information about their balances or whatever, or it's contact our help desk or our contact centers. Now with a fully digital experience through chat and AI, it's how do we get them to do things with us? we don't want that to be the point of their day. It should be a quick and efficient and easy thing to do. And so we're constantly thinking about those experiences. How do we take friction out of it? How do we make it more self-serve for the customer? How do we make it more just, it's something they do in their lunch period on their way of their day and not something they've got to stop their entire day to think about. And so that's the way we're thinking about it. We want that feedback loop with customers we're constantly working with. And part of what Fifth Third's tried to do on this journey we've been on in modernization is create a more product-centric focus. So we have product owners that are sitting with customers and running experiments. And I think, you and I've talked about this in the past. When I got here, we had a mobile app experience. It wasn't great. We could maybe introduce 2 to 3 changes a year to it. Last year in 2024, we put out 500 new changes to the mobile app alone. And they weren't all major changes, but that's kind of the point. I can tweak stuff. I can change the experience very quickly because we've developed a cloud-based mobile kind of nimble architecture that our engineers can adapt very quickly. We're doing A/B testing all the time. And a lot of that is just to continually evolve the experience as we can and need to.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I appreciate you sharing those and remarkable how you thought further about the modernizing of the way in which you do things to facilitate better experiences, both for employees and by extension then directly to customers or through those employees as well. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the skill sets that you're building. I know that you think an awful lot about building your team for the future as well, and given the pace of change, the necessity to ensure that they are constantly aware of and immersed in the practices of the future. Talk a bit about how you think about that and the methods that you're using in order to build that team of the future.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've done a lot over the last 3 to 5 years with really investing in technical architecture. I think large companies in general, there was a period, this will go back to kind of my prior days at GE, where we became enamored with outsourcing. And you know that there's been the industry swings of outsourcing and insourcing. And there was a period where I think big corporate IT functions had a lot of folks with practical experience in more business analyst, project management. And we did a lot of the outsourcing of technical skills. And you lost some of those chops to your partners and your vendors, which, is great from an efficiency standpoint, but it's really bad from a thinking about owning being able to deliver these experiences you want to own. And so over the last couple of years, 3-5 years, we've really invested in doubling down. We've grown our internal engineering teams to be over 400 to 500 people in a 1,200 person organization. We're almost 50% engineering these days. And that spans a couple of different kinds, whether it's cloud engineering, full stack engineering, front end design, data engineering, security engineering, or even a full stack blend of all of it. We've been investing in all of those to really bring in-house the skill sets we need, the weather storms, where I think we learned a big lesson was in COVID, when you're fairly outsourced to partners, you're now at the mercy of their ability to deliver an experience to their employees to be productive. And then when you go even one further and say, wow, I've got some of those engineers in different countries and India locks down and now you don't even have access to your engineering people, that's a hard lesson to learn. And if you don't learn from that, shame on you. But what we've really taken from some of those different things is you've got to have the right breadth and depth of engineering inside of an IT function. You've got to own that. It's just got to be skills you have to earn and invest and nurture. And then I think about how do you go get all those people, right? We talked about us being Cincinnati centric. We can't have an engineering team in Cincinnati alone because there's just not the mass of those types of skills. So, some of the things we've done is kind of on a couple of things. We try to expand our footprint. Fifth Third has a pretty big now presence from multiple functions in Chicago and in Charlotte. So we feel like we have kind of 3 main cities that we are investing in different aspects of company experience, expertise, me and technology. We've really built a security practice in Richmond, which is near the DC corridor where you are because of the talent there. And then when we've thought about recruiting, there's a lot of different ways. We used to traditionally do a lot of campus recruiting, but we're finding a lot of different ways to bring engineering skills in. We're partnering with some partners that have cadet programs where maybe Fifth Third can't hire 50 new skilled people a year sometimes. We can work with partners that can bring them in at the entry level And as they mature, working through us as a contract to hire capacity, then we can bring them on as the demand kind of comes in, right? And so we're doing that. We're working through non-traditional stuff with some partners where we're hiring people that are transitioning away from the service industry that want to get a more solid kind of long-term career path, and finding great success with that. We've populated about 20 of our mainframe roles with people that are in their early 40s that are just learning mainframe skills, that don't have a college degree, that, to be quite frank, colleges don't train a lot of mainframe these days, but the demand's not gone, but the people that do it are retiring. And so we're finding a new way to populate that technology with non-traditional ways, and that's very successful. And that's something that's happening in a lot of places, working with firms that are doing this all over the country. And so we're trying to utilize as many different avenues to find creative ways to grow the technology skills here at the bank. And I think the thing I would say is, I think what's important is you got to have an open mind, but you got to have a plan. You got to know what kind of skills you want. You got to know where you want to grow them, and you got to know how you want to maintain career pathing. We got to reimagine career pathing because of that, and it's been fantastic, but it's not been easy. It's a big commitment to the leadership team to think through some things that we just hadn't had to think through for a long time because of the nature of where the industry was versus where it's going.
Yeah, really interesting to hear more about that as well. And I want to return, you alluded to the fact that the organization is acquisitive. You mentioned a major acquisition in the early phases of your time with the organization. I know you continue to think about acquisition from a fintech perspective. And as we think about skill sets and bringing on new ways of working, or developing a scaled skill through an organization that's already doing something very effectively, this has been an effective method to do that as well. I think about, you mentioned to me last time we spoke, the acquisition of Rise Money, I think it is, which I believe was a real-time payment for a commercial banking solution of one sort or another. You'll correct me if I've got that wrong. But anyway, talk a bit about how you think about acquisition from a fintech perspective, and if you wouldn't mind diving into the details of some of the success stories associated with it. We'd love to hear those as well.
Yeah, sure. We think about fintech partnerships in kind of two ways. There's the fintechs that we partner with because when we are, as a bank, wanting to accelerate into a new market or a new vertical or a new capability that's customer facing, we typically will do that in a way that we are looking at the fintech populations that we can acquire, right? So you mentioned Rise Money. We really believe that there's a tremendous opportunity in banking for growth around embedded payments, embedded banking, right? Embedded finance. And in doing that, we have an option. We could try to build that skill set out, build that practice over time. The reality is that the pace that we think the industry is moving that direction, it would be a much more effective way to get into that space by going in there and acquiring somebody who is already established and has the platform, has the engineering, has the business already establishing. And that was where Rise Money is a good example. So we acquired them. They were small, couple hundred people, but they had a really unique proposition in terms of the platform that they built that didn't exist anywhere else in that industry that we could find. And they had a lot of early opportunities with some big fintechs that I think are going to be disruptive on the majority side of the industry. You think about, we announced partnerships late last year with Stripe and with Trustly as an example. Well, the one way we're going to be able to partner with a Stripe who's, effectively bigger than a Fifth Third when you look at revenue, when you look at size of their business, is we need to be able to match their expectations. And their expectations are that we can function at the speed and the scale of a fintech. And so, what Rise Money really gave us was instant ability to provide a very modern platform in the embedded finance space that we then, within a 6-month period, fully could integrate back into the things that Fifth Third does great, which is moving money on the more traditional money rails. So ACH, wire, those types of things, or real-time payment rails. Once we could connect those two, the sky's the limit. And so that's really a place where over the last couple of years, we've tried to look at where can we acquire fintech that can just give us a boost into a place where we think there's a lot of opportunity for Fifth Third to grow and scale. The other way we've utilized them is in places where we want to get into a new business vertical. We, as Fifth Third, really wanted to look at the healthcare managed practice space, right? In that context, we acquired a Columbus-based company, Provide, who we've left branded Provide and still sits out there. and they've been more of an affiliate structure as opposed to me bringing them all the way into IT. And they've sat out there and they've been one where they have a marketplace they've established to help think about doctor's offices, dentist office, veterinarian offices. And at some point you get into like chiropractic services, and then you help provide practice finance capabilities. So lending, leasing, management, and then transitionary. You want to retire, you want to sell your practice. That's a pretty tough thing to do. You have a lot of leased assets, you have a big customer base. We provide all of those transitioning services as well through Provide. Or another successful one for us in the past couple of years has been in solar, where we've acquired Dividend Finance, where it's a financing for either mainly home solar businesses. And so we've done that one as well. So you think about the fintechs partnerships in kind of two ways. We want to acquire them because we want the technology to make us bigger, broader, in a space where we want to grow as a bank. That's Rise Money. Or you acquire it and maybe you leave them a little separate from like the IT function, but they are out there with an established platform in a space that we want to get into a new vertical. It's an instant access to not just technology, but an entire market space where the customers already exist. And there's a fintech being successful in there, but their scale is going to need somebody like a fintech to buy them to grow in a more traditional way that you think about the fintech growth space in a more modern era elsewhere, right? So that's the way we've been thinking about it, the way we've found success in the last couple of years. I think there's an interesting dynamic there, which is, you buy a fintech, and now all of a sudden they become a part of your bank. How do you think about the culture? How do you think about the regulatory nature of what they're now going to inherit is becoming a regulated entity versus the fintechs largely aren't? And so that's been a really interesting dynamic for I think us as a bank. Is we found a really good success in doing this in a way that we're able to acquire a very agile organization, if you will, and in many cases keep them agile and keep them moving at the pace they were without having it bogged down by the regulatory stuff. I think we have a little bit of a secret sauce there that we're happy about as well.
Very interesting. As you were describing your organization in the early part of our conversation, Jude, you talked about the fact that you have an enterprise data office, and you mentioned separately, more recently, having established an AI part of the organization. And I wanted to talk a bit about the interplay between those two different parts. If in fact I read that appropriately, that they are separate. No doubt there are probably some pretty important touch points between those organizations. And then I'd love to understand more about the constitution of that AI group, as it sounds like it's relatively new and probably evolving. Talk a bit about that if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So they are separate organizations. So the enterprise data office is largely spans across looking over the entire company. So they have a bunch of different structures underneath of that. Some focused on what we are thinking about as the regulatory side. So enterprise data management, regulatory reporting, the stuff that enterprise data has to support as being a bank, filing your Qs and your Ks and all the different letter reports that you have to, making sure that the data is moving across the enterprise in a way that we can rely on the accuracy of those reports. We have a separate piece of the enterprise data office that's much more focusing on enabling the more traditional elements of AI. So they support our data sciences group. They support our modeling groups for fraud and for risk management. And in that case, they're doing a lot more with what I would say is the more traditional views of AI and model risk management and machine learning. And they help enable the business side of those types of things. We have a lot of quants in our fraud and AML space, a lot of quants in our kind of model risk management space, and then data scientists in our kind of consumer bank space that's looking at how they're enabling our bankers to use more modern data practices to support how we talk to our customers about products and services, right? So that's a big piece of what the EDO does, our enterprise data offices. They support that breadth of the company. They're now getting more into the more traditional kind of way you would think about it, which is like the bank's internal aspects of using, data analytics, Power BI, even I'd say in the operational space, things like digital bots and stuff to do, we call it intelligent automation. So thinking about digital bots supporting processes, that kind of stuff. That's all under the EDO's office. Now, our AI group is really made up of advanced data science practitioners that are very advanced in using generative AI, solutions and helping us envision how Gen AI can really change the way we think about the use of those technologies, and really four pillars of our strategy, which is kind of AI for the employee. So you think about it, we have a partnership with Microsoft and Copilot. AI for the engineer, we're rolling out GitHub Copilot for our engineering people. AI for our business, which is introducing Gen AI opportunities to work within our kind of business processes space and the IT space. And then AI for the customer, which will eventually be one that sits in how we interact with customers using it. So that group is really thinking about, at the pace that AI is moving from a generative AI perspective, how are we as a bank positioning ourselves with platforms, with technology to utilize that in those four pillars? And then we're starting to run experiments in all of them, right? We've rolled out Copilot to all the employees at the company. We have a couple hundred engineers using GitHub Copilot, 5 main projects in kind of our AI for the business, where we're looking at the use of generative AI in different aspects of our processes inside the company. And then our chat engagement with customers is starting to look at how Gen AI is going to allow us to rapidly go from kind of more traditional chat technology to Gen AI in that space. Where they interact is, interestingly enough, really in the space that is around how do we do that with safety and soundness. So the EDO team is really leading the governance side of Gen AI, working with our AI team, because they run a lot of governance stuff anyways for data and its use. It was a natural extension to have the EDO really step in to kind of mediate how do we appropriately introduce new capabilities like generative AI in a safe and sound way. And so where our experts in AI are really experts in the technology, I really don't want them spending a lot of their time on governance stuff. And so the EDO is stepped in and raised their hand and said, hey, we're going to help with that. We're going to make sure that we're understanding the policies around Gen AI that need to be in place, and the technologies that they can and can't be used, at how and at what pace we can use it. And so they're really helping govern the way we deploy it, whereas the AI team is always pushing the next layer of advancement. Where should we take it next? Where can we think about introducing it next into our employees' hands, our customers' hands, or whatever? And then the balance that they work together on is like, at what pace can we really do that? And at what comfort level can we do it, so we can always talk to the regulators about, this is how we're doing, this is why you should feel comfortable with us doing it this way. I think in banking, that's really important, because you get out over your skis in a new technology in banking, and that becomes a real problem, because you'll get slowed and stopped. And then getting started back up is always a problem. But if you can always put that governance piece of it kind of right in front of or in line with where you're going, the regulators are much more comfortable with you doing it at the pace that they can feel, because they can now see that you are doing it in the right way, and they can feel better about it. And so that's always the balance. And that's where those two organizations are really working well together for us. Is, we're going fast, but we're not going so fast so we can't articulate the safety and soundness pieces of it.
Yeah, really interesting. I wanted to also just ask you a bit. You referenced your time at GE, and among the practices you brought forward are those associated with Six Sigma, for example. You spent almost 17 years with the company in various parts of it, and growing sets of responsibilities, ending your time there as a Chief Information Officer of GE Aviation. And I wonder, if you reflect upon it, there arguably is no better talent factory than is GE, especially in the tech field. Beyond that as well, but as we're having this conversation together, the number of CIOs of major companies that have emerged from GE is profound. And I wonder if you could maybe reflect a little bit on some of what made that place special for so long, such that so many people, peers of yours, and yourself, of course, have had such a lasting impact inside and then outside of the company.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, there's a couple ways I answer that question, Peter. I think first and foremost, GE taught all of us a couple things that a lot of IT leaders don't get that other companies, when you think about its focus on Six Sigma and Lean Six Sigma, right? I grew up in that company always understanding the way technology and business interacted together at a very big level, because as you became more and more invested in from the company in terms of your progression and development as a leader inside of GE, they always were stretching you not just to be better at the technology, but to be better at solving problems that the business cared about or needed solved. And so you got this investment from GE in I'd call it two ways. They always were interested in me becoming a better IT leader. So they never divorced me from the technology. I always had to understand and stay current on IT trends, the applicability of technology to where it was going and driving its value to the company. But it was always investing in my problem solving, my business knowledge, my business awareness, and putting those two things together. Because inside of GE, you had management tracks that kind of went in those two directions. Like I had a leadership structure that was very IT focused all the way up to the CIO track in being a leader of an IT organization and being a leader in technology. I was in parallel in leadership development with the rest of the company around purely leadership and leading a business. And I think that the reason that GE was so good at producing CIOs or producing leaders is because it heavily invested in both sides of the leader. And I do think that was fairly unique. I mean, when I still keep in touch with many of my colleagues at GE, and I think all of us is a part of those experiences, went through that training together, right? Many of us went through the same IT leadership classes over the same decade. We also went through the same business leadership development together. And so, I don't think anything grows a leader more than being able to have those shared experiences and then being constantly interacting with those people. And so when you leave there, one of the things I think you go through as a leader in transition is there's kind of a bit of a vacuum, but that's gone. Like that doesn't happen because now I'm in a new place where a bunch of other people went through a bunch of different experiences. And now you're trying to figure out, man, how do I take what I did and use that to the benefit of the new company that I'm in? And part of what I think I loved about coming to Fifth Third is my boss that brought me in here, Greg Carmichael at the time, was a GE alum himself. And so I was fortunate in that I had a CEO that I could go like, man, like this was my reference point there. And like, I'm not seeing that here. How do I reorient myself so that, one of the things you worry about is like, you say GE every third word your first 2 years at the new place. And eventually you're like, I'm sick of hearing about it. Right. And so, it's in a good and a bad way, like the thing you bring in, because as you're changing the way you're working with the IT organization, like for me at Fifth Third, I wanted to balance the fact I wasn't trying to recreate GE inside of Fifth Third because that doesn't work, right? So then you've got to start to separate the leadership you got there that was very much a highly functional environment inside of the company to how do I take that and transition to be a new leader in a new place? And I think that's what a lot of us go through when we end up leading GE. And so a lot of the context of talking to my peers from GE as I've gone and they've gone to different companies like Nationwide or United Airlines or wherever is like, how did you make that? How are you making that transition? And how do you think about the successful transition? A lot of us struggle with it. There's a lot of people, you look at the GE leaders that left, a lot of them, they bounce around every couple of years. And I think it's interesting. That'd be an interesting thing to talk about some of them, about the ones that stuck at a place and the ones that didn't, like why. But for me, I think I always look back on it fondly, and I'll always say like it was, there wasn't an MBA program, there wasn't any other way to get the experiences that I got there. And I'll always say like there will never be regret in my life for the career I had at GE and the colleagues I made there and all the experiences I got. And I just have been a very fortunate and humble human being to be a part of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I really appreciate those reflections, Jude. I wanted to ask you, as you look ahead to the remainder of 2025, are there trends we haven't already discussed? We've discussed a number of them, but any others that come to mind that particularly excite you as you look ahead?
Yeah, it's good. I think we've talked on a lot, but I mean, there's some interesting stuff. I think about things like quantum computing have been talked about, and then, the NVIDIA conference, right? I think the conversation was it's still a while away. It's still, and then you see their stocks plummet. And it's like, where AI is going, and I was listening to a podcast, a separate one, different one, but earlier today about things like AI and the curve it's on. You talk about new tech, and they all go through the same curve at different paces, whatever. But AI is still in this rapid acceleration phase where we don't really know where it's going to start to level out or even when. And to me, I think the diverse, like we all say AI, but there's emerging technology, emerging use cases around it that are going to keep happening, I think, for the next couple years. And to me, when you and I talk, and it's like about at the organizational level or whatever, but I think, Frankie, you get to talk to a lot of different people. Like, it's such a broad space. Like, it's going to continue to be the thing that I think we all talk about in 2025. I think information security and cyber is going to continue to evolve just by nature of the rapid pace of the way that the good guys and bad guys are kind of always constantly fighting. But I think the one that I think we don't talk about a lot, at least I don't talk about a lot, is I think what you're seeing now is, from an organizational standpoint, the generational transition from baby boomers and millennials and Gen X's to millennials is really bringing a way that companies are thinking about IT very differently. Like, the traditional IT organization was always trying to help the business become more tech savvy. Well, the people entering the workforce today are way more tech savvy than many of the IT people if you're not careful, right? And you've got social media influence society dramatically. You've got, employees of the kind of the new generation, the digital generations that, they're very comfortable with technology. And so I think what'll be interesting, and I'll be interesting, is hopefully you and I stay connected over the year and the next couple of years. Like, the role of IT inside the company is going to change. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how I think the traditional structures are going to be challenged a little bit, because we're not hand holding the business as much as we used to. We're kind of back to becoming an enabling function in some way. And I think it's going to change the dynamic a lot between the CTO organization versus the CIO organization, and how they work together, and technologies that are users and consumers of these technologies. They're just very comfortable with using them. And like, how does that play into the way IT works with the business? I think, that's going to be a very dynamic thing to think about. And I think it's going to change a lot of the ways that we interact with as a company together. I think that's where I see a lot of change happening that is going to be pretty interesting, because I don't know how it's going to play out yet.
Really interesting reflections, though, and something for us to, as you point out, to remain abreast of as this continues to change. How will it impact value created by IT organizations? And, how does one think about differentiated value within IT when so much of the organization is tech savvy? And in fact, so many consumers are tech savvy in ways that one wouldn't would not have seen in generations past. Really interesting observations, to say the least.
Yeah.
Jude, I was going to also ask you as a closing question. You already alluded perhaps to a portion of the answer. I was going to ask if there's anything you've recently read, listened to, or watched recently or watched that you would recommend to others. Sounds like you're a podcast listener as a start, for instance, but anything that comes to mind that you would recommend to peers to check out?
Yeah, I think a couple. I mean, for me, there's a couple things I do. I try to listen to a couple areas that are I think relevant, especially to the leadership community, right? So I really find value in Simon Sinek and his Bit of Optimism podcast. I think he just talks a lot about social and about business, I think, and how those two things come together. Adam Grant's Rethinking podcast is another one that I think is great for leaders to always be thinking about, because it's very organizationally focused in culture. And then the last one that I find tremendous, but it's a long one, Commit To, is Acquired. If you listen to the Acquired series, those guys do a phenomenal job talking about company and origin stories. And I think, you invest in like those three, and you get a pretty good, I think, broad set of podcasts they're pretty important for, I think, leaders to be thinking about when it comes to businesses and culture and leadership styles and that kind of stuff. So
great suggestions, all, Jude.
Yeah,
I appreciate you sharing those. Those are really, really great ones indeed. And thank you for the conversation more generally, Jude. A phenomenal one, emblematic of the remarkable change that you and the team have ushered in across the past 7 years at Fifth Third, as well as a trip down memory lane to your broader career. I really appreciate you sharing so much and so many valuable insights for our audience. It's been great to speak with you today.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Same to you, and Happy New Year. And I hope we get to connect here in the new year quite a bit. So thanks again for giving me a chance to talk with you. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to doing it again.
I do as well. Thank you, Jude.